Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether we're sharing personal stories or business stories, how we share them makes a difference in how we remember them and in how we're perceived by the people we're interacting with. When I'm working with clients, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen to consider your own related stories, to listen and to consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Imposter syndrome, according to Cambridge Dictionary Online, is the feeling that your achievements are not real or that you do not deserve praise or success. In other words, when you're outwardly successful, but often feel like a fraud, like at some point everyone is going to know the real you. There have been major studies about this phenomenon, and great articles have been written to describe outwardly wildly successful people who suffer from imposter syndrome. An article I recently read said that a person with imposter syndrome attaches almost exclusively external factors to their success. I was in the right place at the right time. I was fortunate to be in this opportunity. This landed in my lap. But while they're attributing these external factors to their success, they're attributing their failures internally. I'm not smart enough. I wasn't paying enough attention. I could have done better. Then there are those who turn it completely around, the non-imposter syndrome professionals who attribute their success almost entirely to their own intelligence, their beauty, their savvy. And their failures are all externally driven. He didn't want me to succeed. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. If only this had happened. There's a Harvard Business Review article about overcoming imposter syndrome, and they place internal messages right up front in dealing with those minimizing thoughts. There's a lot more to this. People who don't acknowledge the external contributing factors to their success, who describe themselves as self-made, are missing a major component of humility and humanity. No one is literally self-made. Every human has a biological mother and father. And beyond that, consider genetics, family economics, public utilities, public education. All of those pieces, your access to mentors and advocates, all of those pieces contribute to your success. And some people are even driven almost entirely by spite. So even a negative influence could possibly contribute to your success. There are also factors that contribute to failure. Are you acknowledging those internal factors? If you can't take responsibility for the things you didn't succeed with, you're missing all kinds of great opportunities for growth and for connection with others. Blaming outside external forces for failure means you're not acknowledging those moments when you were truly human and vulnerable. And where does that leave you? Your internal messages come from all of your experiences, from your very early interactions through your young adulthood. And it's no wonder those messages are hard to fight. We're hardwired to keep them. Once they're placed in our heads, they've created neural pathways in our brain, and it's almost impossible to change them. And it is impossible if you aren't aware of them and don't understand where they came from. I was a freshman in college, and I was walking through the open space of a friend's dorm with her, and two very tall basketball players stopped to say hello. One of them asked me out, and he had a reputation, so I said no. He put his huge hands on my hips and easily lifted me to set me down on top of a tall vending machine. Now I was in a sundress, and it would have been very awkward for me to try to climb down. I blushed deep pink and asked him to please help me down, and he laughed. He said, "I'll help you down if you say you'll go out with me." I shook my head no, stared directly at his friend, the one that had a reputation for being a nice guy, and the nice guy said, "Dude, that's not cool. Get her down from there." He didn't. He said, "I'll take her down when she agrees to go out with me." So his friend reached up and helped me down. When he put me down, I looked straight up at the guy who put me up there and said, "I am not a toy. Don't ever do that again." They walked away, and I could hear them chuckling. Now, this wasn't the first time someone picked me up without my permission. As a matter of fact, it had happened many times. In elementary school, everyone wanted to give me piggyback rides because I was little. I was like a doll to them. And in high school, I was asked to play one of the very young daughters in Fiddler on the Roof, even though I had auditioned for speaking and a singing role. Why? Because I'm small. I was lucky to pass 5 feet my freshman year of college, which of course is highly unusual for a woman to grow that late in life, but I did. And thank goodness, because all I really wanted was to outgrow my mother. But it's not just my height. When I graduated from college, I weighed under 100 pounds. It was almost impossible to find professional clothes and shoes in my size. Now I know this can sound awesome, and there are women who would be super grateful to be as tiny as I am. I mean, for instance, I'm probably the most comfortable person on an airplane. And it also often means that I look young, which is cool. I was ID'd at 41 years old. But when I was professional in my late 20s and early 30s, looking young didn't do me any favors. People had a hard time taking me seriously. In one meeting I was facilitating, a woman in her 50s was completely dismissive toward me until I found an opportunity to tell her my age. She was so startled, but then suddenly started to pay attention to me as if my age created more value. When a good friend recently heard about a trip I was about to take, we were visiting about my expectations and my self-consciousness about it, and I said, "It just feels kind of weird, like I'm just little Sarah from Montana, and what do I have to contribute to this group?" Now, I wasn't entirely serious. I know my value, and I know I can make a difference in certain situations. But that little voice came up, and it had to come from somewhere, right? She looked at me, shocked, and said, "Sarah, no one thinks of you as little Sarah. No one." It took me a while to process that conversation. I had to really dig into why I had that self-limiting, small voice still speaking to me. That's when I realized it has a lot to do with my size and the way I was perceived because of it. When I meet someone and I'm sitting down, they're always visibly surprised to see how petite I am when I stand up. Clearly, the way I'm presenting myself is much taller than my actual height. Before my 20th high school reunion, I had dreams that I was in my old school and wandering through the halls, saying hello to people. The weird thing about these dreams is that I was much taller in my dreams as an adult 20 years out of high school. I woke up a little disappointed, and then I realized that maybe that's just how I see myself now, not as physically taller, but taller in stature. A friend recently described himself as big and goofy. I asked him where that came from because that's not at all how I see him. He told me a story about having moved in 5th grade, and he had to establish himself somehow in the new school. He found great success in being goofy. The other students responded to that silly, self-deprecating behavior, and he was able to make friends, or at least he could make his classmates laugh with him rather than at him. It got me thinking about how these childhood and young adulthood perceptions and words we use to describe ourselves, and how others may describe us from our past, and how that impacts our current potential and success in our future. It also got me thinking, again, about imposter syndrome and how to deal with it. Now, up until recently, I thought maybe that's what I was suffering from, imposter syndrome. But now I'm thinking that those internal messages are more an identity issue. They're a confidence issue. I attribute my success equally to hard work, experience, introspection, and to the support network I have, the fortune of being born where and who I am, and the relatively low-drama household I was raised in. What I realize is that I'm not alone in feeling like a kid, like I'm pretending to be a grown-up and doing grown-up things. The other thing I realize is that I like that about myself and those who relate to that kind of mentality. It keeps us youthful, curious, adventurous, and optimistic. So now the question comes to, what stories are you still telling yourself that are simply no longer true? Are those stories yours, or do they belong to someone else? Are you holding on to certain perceptions because they worked for you at some point? And now the big question, is it time to let them go? Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Now listen to me, honey, while Would you tell me that you're going